Welcome back to the Bernard Lee Poker Show. We are talking with four-time WSOP bracelet winner, Brian Yoon, who, as I mentioned previously, won 3 of his bracelets in no-limit events, the little one for one drop, 5K 8-handed, and also the monster stack. But his 4th bracelet is a game that I love. I like the no-limit version, but he won it in the triple draw version, deuce to 7. And it was the 10K championship event that he won against, obviously, the best triple draw players out there. He won almost $250,000 against a field of 90 players, and some of the best triple draw players obviously going to battle with him. Talk a little bit about how you got involved in deuce to 7 from no limit. I mean, people ask me that all the time. I have a rationale, but triple draw from no limit hold'em to triple draw, that's a different stretch. And so how did you get involved, and how did you kind of start playing?
Yeah, so I've always just played no limit hold'em pretty much my entire poker career.
Yeah.
But I started playing a little bit of mixed games just for fun, nothing serious, maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago, just dabbling a little bit, like you know how it is at the world just like all 8 game basically.
Yeah. Okay.
At the World Series of Poker, you're there, you get eliminated from a tournament early.
Right.
There's a 3 p.m. event for 8 game or
1500. Why not?
Yeah. So, flick it in. Oh, it's pretty fun. You have a good time.
Of
you
course.
You don't have any expectations. You're just like, maybe.
And it's nowhere near as serious as no limit hold'em. No sunglasses, no staring down. You either fold or you think about it for a second, or you call, let's go, that kind of thing.
So just different vibes. And I enjoyed it. So I started playing a little bit here and there. But triple draw was my favorite game out of basically that 8 game mix.
Yeah.
So, no limit hold'em aside. And so I don't know what it is about it. I just really enjoyed it. Like, something about just getting to draw. There's no community cards. Like, there was at a very core level, the basic strategy I think is not too complicated as well. So it's very easy to get into. And then there's a little bit of gamble to it too, which is pretty fun. Like, you get to sweat the cards at the end and all that good stuff. For the degenerates out there, if you're thinking of a game, draw games are the way to go. You get a little sweat. But yeah, I just enjoyed it a lot. So I would say every time I would go back to Canada to play online or something like that, I would always play the triple draw tournaments online. Like during WCOOP or Scoop, they would have one triple draw event.
Right. There's always one of them. Yeah.
Because like no one really plays it, but then they would have like one, maybe 2, and I would always play it. It was always like pretty fun, and I would just get a little bit better every time I played. And then the last few years, especially with COVID hitting, I had a lot more time to just like focus on studying poker. Mm-hmm. And I was like, you know what? Maybe it's finally me and my friends always joke. We're like, guys, are we gonna learn mixed games this year? Yeah, let's learn mixed games. Like, that sounds like a good idea. It's pretty profitable. Let's do that. Right. 6 months later, none of us have looked at a single thing for mixed games. Like, no one's studying mixed games,
Right.
And finally during COVID, I was like, guys, it's time. We're gonna learn mixed games. None of them learned mixed games, but I looked on.
But you stuck to it.
I looked at triple draw a little bit. I had a good time, and then, I felt like this is the most fun game for me. I was having a little bit of lack of interest in no limit as well, so that definitely helped. Like, I didn't really want to play no limit as much. I'm enjoying playing things like triple draw. It kind of was like the perfect storm of like, okay, I have all the time in the world. Why not? Let's do it. So yeah, I started focusing on triple draw. And when World Series rolled around for 2021, I was like, okay, I'm definitely like ready.
Circle the events.
I was ready. I was ready to play this tournament. Right. I was like, I had played the 10K triple draw the year before. I think 2019 was the last World Series before.
Yes.
So I played it then. I kind of like bubbled the tournament. I got, maybe like 10 off the money, something like that.
Right.
But it was a good experience. And I realized, okay, like I'm definitely a little far off. I'm definitely making mistakes and I don't really know what the answer is here and there. So I worked on it. And this time when I played it, I felt so confident. Like every decision I was making, I would say there were definitely a few spots where I was like, not sure. I kind of like looked back at it later, but for the most part, I was like, wow, I really know what I'm doing now in this game. And
that's awesome.
Combine that with some luck. Obviously you need some luck to win a tournament.
Of course.
Like I ran well in some spots for sure. But I felt very confident in my decision making, and everything just kind of worked out well. And luckily enough, I was able to take it down.
So talk about, now that you said that, it's kind of like when you were a donk way back when, and now you are what you're playing now. But like, let's talk about 2 or 3 strategies, and really let's go with, people don't know how to play deuce to 7. For people who don't, it's a 5-card draw game. You have 3 draws. That's why it's called triple draw. You basically bet pre-draw, post first draw. Those are like, if it was 5-10, it would be 5 bets. Then the second draw and third draw are the 10 bets, right? So it gets 2 small bets, 2 big bets. And you play just like you were playing like No Limit Hold'em. There's a small blind and a big blind, and you kind of go from there. So what would you say, really starting out, couple of 2 to 3 like piece of his advice for people who, they kind of understand the game, but they don't really understand the game?
Yeah, I guess the first thing I want to say is I think triple draw might be an easier game for people to learn as a poker game than No Limit Hold'em. Like if you're if you're a complete poker beginner, I think triple draw might be like a better way. Like assuming you don't want to play No Limit specifically for whatever reason, I think it's actually a better game to learn. You can definitely just like teach it to your family members or like a friend that doesn't really know poker, and you guys can just play at the kitchen table. And it's actually a lot easier, in my opinion, because you don't really need to know too much complicated strategy or anything compared to No Limit. Like betting is fixed, it's a limit game, right? And you're just like kind of pitching cards back and forth. It's very simple at its core. So I highly advise anyone interested in like learning mixed games or learning a new game. Like triple draw is a really good one to start with. It's pretty basic at its core.
It would almost be better to start with ace to 5 triple draw, because then you don't even have to worry about the straight stuffs and everything like that. You know what I mean?
True.
You know what I mean? Because I'm just saying, like, you and I are saying this and we'll understand, most people won't, but like the 3, 4, 5, 6 hand, like everyone's like, this is great. It's really horrendous, to be honest. Yeah. Whereas 2, 3, 4, 5 really isn't that bad in single, ace to 5. Right. Anyway, I'm just throwing that out there, that if people are to take it to that next level of interest, start out with ace to 5 triple draw low ball, where ace 2, 3, 4, 5 a straight in most worlds is still the best low, and then you can kind of go from there. Whereas the reason why it's called deuce to 7, people, is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is a straight. That can't be. So then you move it up to 7. So it's 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 is the best low hand, because aces are always considered high, just so everyone fully understands why the game is called what it is. But it's an interesting comment by you with regards to what you were saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But getting into more strategy for the game for people that have a rough idea of like the basics of it. I would say the first thing that people want to do when they start playing this game is like 2 things. The first one is just starting hands. I think starting hands, you can probably say this about every poker game out there, but starting hands are usually like the most important thing. You kind of alluded to it a little bit, is that hands that don't have a deuce in them in this game are particularly bad. It's not to say that you always need a deuce, but it helps a lot to have a deuce in your starting hand. So a hand like 7-3 deuce, for example, you're drawing to try and hit a 4, 5, or a 6 twice, basically, which is a pretty advantageous situation for you, compared to if you have something like 3, 4, 5. You might think, oh, what's the difference? But when you catch like a 6 there, now you have an open-ended straight draw, and you can't really make as many good hands, because now a deuce or a 7 is no good for you, right? So you don't really have the same number of outs as you would with a more pure draw, we would say. So
and even if you have 3, 4, 5 and you catch not a 6, but you catch a 7, let's say,
right,
well, the 6 is dead. Like, so that you've also eliminated one of those cards. I also want to throw out to everyone what Brian was talking about, is that why a deuce is so key is you cannot make a 7 without a deuce.
Right.
So if you guys think about it, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 would be a straight to a 7. So therefore, for you to make a 7, and there are only 4 7s, you have to have a deuce. Without a deuce, you can't make a 7. That's actually incredibly, some people just don't understand that concept. Like, what do you mean? Like, you cannot make a 7 without, and obviously in triple draw, It's very different from no limit. No limit, nines and tens win very often. In triple draw, eight's almost bare minimum, and there are a good number of sevens you see out there in the end.
Yeah. So deuces is super important. I actually find it funny because when I was playing the 10K this year that I won, on day 2, I got a comment from another player at the table who was tilted because I was beating him in every hand. And he said something like, this guy's starting all these hands without a deuce in them, and he's just winning the pots, because I was winning hands with like 8, 6, 5, 4, 3 and things like that. And he was so upset about it. And I was just thinking in my head, like, every hand I just beat you in was super standard. Like, nothing weird happened. I wasn't making like a crazy open or anything. Like, it was all very, very normal, but he was so upset about it. But then it sounds very counterintuitive to what we just said here about, like, you must start with a deuce in your hand.
Right. Well, but, it's advantageous to start with a deuce. If you started with a hand 3, 4, 8 in late position, I don't think anyone's blaming you for starting with 3, 4, 8, you know, that kind of thing. Because for people, again, we're getting a little bit beyond, but if you have 3, 4, 8, you can't make a straight there because it's 3, 4, then 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's very similar to 2, 3, 7. Just move it up one notch. It's very straightforward. And, you know, 85 is the 5th best hand possible. So it's still a very, very solid hand. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. So I would say if people want to play deuce, just work on your starting hands. Just make sure you start with reasonable draws. It'll help you so much more on the later streets of the hand. You won't be in like very difficult situations because it'll be very clear cut, like what your draw is, as opposed to like, oh, I have 4 to a straight. What should I do? Like, I don't know. And then the second thing is, a lot of decision making in this game is kind of automatic, and you just kind of need to learn what the automatic decision is. And then, like, you know, 80% of your decisions are just automatic. And it's nice when you just have like a very clear cut idea, like, oh, I should bet here. Oh, I should check here. So an example would be, let's say I raise from early position and the big blind defends, and the big blind draws 2 cards. And then I, as the early position opener, draw 1 card. In this situation, the big blind should almost always check, and I should almost always bet. There are some very, very minor exceptions to this, but you can basically treat it as a rule that this should always go check, and then I bet, and then they decide what they do based on whatever they caught. So the reason for that would be because I'm drawing less cards than they are. And it should make sense that, like, because I'm drawing less cards, I have an advantage because I only need 1 card to improve to make my hand, whereas the other opponent needs 2 cards to improve their hand. So they're at a natural disadvantage in this situation. So they should never like lead out of nowhere because they're leading into a range that is stronger, which is mine. So that's like kind of an automatic decision. And I think a lot of spots in deuce to 7 triple draw are like that. And so you just need to learn those situations, and it'll help you out a lot to save your brain power for the hard decisions, you know, not the easy decisions.
Right. What about drawing? Like you said, when you are drawing, what should you be looking at? You know, and I've played these games and you see players who just draw ridiculous, right? And so would you, as a kind of just general rule, would you pretty much try to say you limit your draws to 2 at most? And if you are drawing 2, you better be drawing to a really good, not just random crappy hand. You should be drawing to something good. Would you ever draw 3? Would you ever draw 4, etc.? That kind of thing. Again, it sounds, for someone who just won the 10K deuce to 7, I know that you're like, what? But remember, a lot of these people who are listening right now to our show, some people never played deuce to 7. They don't even play draw games. So how would you think about that? They look at, maybe some people are looking at, well, I got 3 draws. Why not? I got 2, 2, 3. Well, let's go. That kind of thing.
Yeah. So obviously it's going to vary a little bit based on position and, you know, exactly what's going on. But in a very general sense, anytime you have a draw 1 from the start is going to be a very strong hand. And anytime you have a pat hand, I should say pat meaning like you don't need to draw at all. You're drawing 0. That's obviously incredibly strong hand. And that would be to like a pat 7 or a pat 8, even a pat 9. These are obviously very strong hands. But draw 1s from the get-go, very strong. Draw 2s will predominantly be what people are playing because that's like the most common. I have a draw 2, let's see what happens from the start. Once you get to draw 3, this is a bit more niche. If you're a beginner, I would stray away from playing draw 3s in general.
Right.
The more advanced you get at the game, the more knowledgeable you get at the game, you will learn that there are spots where you can play draw threes and it's completely fine. But when you're first starting out, it's just going to be tougher for you to win playing draw threes. And there are actually even some draw fours you can play in some very niche situations. But again, I would stray away from those because if you're a beginner, you're just going to be playing way too many hands if you don't understand exactly when to play those.
When you are drawing one or two, what would you limit your draws to? So in other words, what is the highest that you will keep?
Mm-hmm. So,
so are you keeping, obviously you're keeping a 7 draw, you're obviously keeping an 8 draw, we talked about it.
right.
How much are you keeping a 9 or a 10, if ever?
Right. So it's like you said, 7s and 8s are generally what people are drawing to. And because there are 3 draws in this game, a lot of hands you see at Showdown are going to be in that 8 range. So you're going to want to try and make an 8 yourself. That said, there are definitely situations where you end up playing for a 9. But again, it's a little bit more of a advanced strategy, so to speak. Like as a general rule, as a beginner, I would say try to just go for 7s and 8s. Right. And as you get more experience, you'll learn like situations where, okay, keeping a 9 makes sense here. Maybe even keeping a 10 might make sense here. It's really just more, the more you play and more experience you get, you'll learn these situations. But yeah, in a very general sense, 7s and 8s are the way to go.
And also when you're talking about that, there are a lot of times where you may be keeping a 9, like you said, a stretch, keeping a 10, but often it's not on the first draw. It's often a little bit later on, maybe on the second draw. You've had a second draw, you got a 9, you were drawing to a 7, and then you got a 9 and someone draws 1, you may just pat there, even though it's a 9-7. It's not as strong as a 7 or an 8, but it's very strong in that situation because they're drawing 1 and you have a pat 9. The general rule is typically jack. If you have a jack or better and they're drawing 1, you're about a 50-50. If they're drawing 2 and you have a queen, you're about a 50-50. Do you kind of generally keep that in this? Of course, every situation is different. Do you generally keep that as a rule for yourself? Do you even lower it maybe and say like, okay, if I have a 10 and they draw 1, I'll be good, that kind of thing? How do you, because I've played in No Limit where I'll be honest with you, it's 1 draw, it's not multiple draws. I kept a queen. I know I was a little bit of an underdog, but in that specific spot, I had many more chips than he did. And let's go, let's see what happens. And when he took 1, I just flipped it over and he goes, what? That's it? I go, hey, let's see what happens. That kind of thing. What's kind of your thought process when you're doing that?
Yeah. So as soon as you get down to that last draw, you're basically playing single draw, right? So any kind of strategy you have from single draw, if you've ever played that game, is going to carry over. But the thing is, first of all, it depends if you're all in or not. So if you're playing a tournament, if you're all in, of course you're just going to play your equity, right? Meaning that if you're a favorite, even by like 0.1% or whatever, you're going to be you want to stay that favorite. Right. So if somehow you're all in and your opponent draws 1 and you have a jack in your hand, you're going to stay pat because you're a favorite. It's a very small favorite, but you want to take that edge because there's no future betting to be done. But it gets interesting when you are not all in, which is usually the case, that you guys are playing for chips, and they draw 1 and you have, say, jack 7, 4, 3 deuce, right? So you have a strong 7 draw, but you've caught a jack. You are a favorite if you pat here, but usually you want to just draw to your 7 anyways. And you might think, well, why are you drawing if you're a favorite? Don't you just want to stay the favorite? But the thing is, you have implied odds by trying to make your hand and getting an extra bet or even multiple bets from your opponent on the next street. So in this case, you would toss the jack, draw to your wheel, and sometimes you're going to make a really good hand, right? Like a 7. Even catching an 8 in this situation is pretty powerful when both people are drawing. And you get to win more money later in the hand. And that makes up for the, 0.1, 0.2, 0.5% equity, whatever you end up giving up by breaking your hand. So again, every situation is going to be a little bit different, but in a very general sense, you tend to want to break jacks. But once you get to a 10 or a 9, they're just too powerful that you can't break it basically. So
because your equity is just so much better.
Yeah.
It's not 50-50 anymore. It's definitely more 55 or 60% favorite in that scenario. With regards to deuce to seven, it was explained to me once when we were playing, and that it is a limit game, but it ends up becoming one of the biggest big bet games, especially in like Poker Players Championship or 8-game mix or whatever, because there are a lot of times in stud, hold'em limit or whatever that people trek a street. But in deuce to seven triple draw, it is almost 90% of the time people are betting. No one's ever just checking there. And it becomes a very, very big bet game. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think the biggest perpetrator by far, and I know very little about this game, but I know that it is true that pot limit deuce to seven triple draw is far and away the game that plays the biggest whenever they play like these mixes at the World Series.
Yeah.
But it is definitely true in like the more limit game, like the Players Championship and things like that. Triple draw definitely plays big. You're playing a lot of streets, and equities run decently close as long as people are drawing still and no one's pat. So everyone's going to get to like that big bet street. And then if they call there, it's just going to be like a pretty big pot. And there's a lot of situations where people like to put in raises to try and make you break your hand and all this kind of stuff. Right. And now there's just like extra big bets being thrown in there out of nowhere. Whereas, I guess the other comparable games like stud high or limit hold'em, there's definitely more checking, and maybe not as much in stud high, but in limit hold'em, I think there's a little bit more checking that goes on. People just don't have as good of hands very often. And in stud high, I think stud high plays pretty big, to be honest, but
well, yeah, it definitely can play pretty big because it has multiple streets, it's 5 betting, streets kind of thing.
People are just getting
so. Right. So, but I mean, we could talk about this for hours. I can at least, and I'm sure my listeners are like, get back to no limit hold'em, and we will. Don't worry about it. But Brian, I really appreciate your time. It's fascinating to talk about deuce limit, but it's also fascinating. Congratulations. We wanted to have you on the show for a while. We know we played with each other at the deuce to seven no limit this past WSOP. But hopefully we'll have you on again when you win your next one, which I am sure will eventually happen. And we'd love to have you back on and talk maybe some no limit as well.
Sounds good. Yeah. I hope you're right about me winning another one. But yeah, it was great. Thanks for having me.
Let me get mine first. Is that okay? Is it that? I mean, it's still one, and then you can take as many as you want. How's that?
Let's get heads up, and we'll let the cards decide who wins.
Then you'll win your 5th. Brian Yoon here on the Bernard Lee Poker Show, talking about his 4 bracelets, specifically the 10K deuce to 7. Hope you enjoyed the show. Stay tuned. We are going to have more winners. We're also going to have on a Hall of Famer here. A little bit of a teaser. We'll tell you who that is shortly, but we'll have more winners from the 2021, and it's amazing. Only 4 months away, folks. 2022 WSOP is right around the corner. Stay tuned, and as always, may you always go in with the best hand, and may you never get unlucky. Good night, everybody. Also, if you are interested and you have enjoyed this interview, don't forget to like and subscribe. YouTube followers, you'll have more interviews like this one, and you won't miss any of them. Thanks a lot. Have a great night, everyone.